Hi, welcome to the Arise Beautiful podcast. I am your host, Angenette Speaks. And here at Arise Beautiful, we talk about several topics. We talk about relationships, spirituality, service, career slash school, depending on where you're at in life. And lastly, self. And so today we are going to be talking about the topic of relationships, specifically the mother-daughter relationship. So I'm really excited for our guest. So I'm going to allow her the opportunity to introduce herself.
Hey, Angenette, thank you for having me. My name is Ann Dillard. I'm a licensed marriage and family therapist. I run a private practice in Decatur, Georgia, but I also see clients. I'm licensed in Minnesota as well. I am the mother daughter healer, all things mother daughter. That's the focus of my practice, working on this very complex but important relationship in our lives. And when I'm not doing that, I am traveling and doing work in Senegal, West Africa with my nonprofit, Project Safety Net. So I'm just delighted to be here with you to have this conversation.
Yes, I'm so happy to have you. I love the work that she's doing. The mother-daughter relationship is a really important one, especially for Black women. We see this issue come up over and over and over and over again, and so I think it's a very complex issue and something that I'm really excited to like dive into and talk to with the mother-daughter guru.
Thank you.
So tell us a little bit about what got you into doing this work.
Yeah, I started doing this work. Well, I didn't realize that I was doing it a while back, right? Because what happens is, as a teen leader, coach, mentor, and then moving on to being a therapist of teenagers, what I really noticed was that the common theme that was coming up were issues with mothers. And then I started doing work with young adults as well, and inevitably, everything that comes up, it went right back to their relationship with their mothers. And it's such an important relationship, yet a very complex relationship. And so, back in, I think it was 2017, I got invited to be a part of what is that called? An anthology. It's called Unchained My Legacy. And it was a group of 12 Black women writing about things that we needed to unchain in order to create a legacy of health and wellness for our families. And at that time, I took a deep dive and started looking closely at my relationship with my daughter and realized that, oh my gosh, I've done some of those things that, you know, how when you're growing up and your mother did something, you're like, when I have kids, I'll never do that, right? I was like, oh, what a rude awakening. I've done some of those same things. And so I started focusing my work around that.
Mm, good, good, good. It's interesting how, you know, uh, how this continues to come up. Like you said, I work with a lot of teenagers as well. I work with young adults. I work with older, Black women too. And it's like at every layer, there is this issue that keeps coming up, especially with kids, and how do I relate to my mother? How do I love my mother, but I'm also extremely hurt by my mother? How do I facilitate that conversation? How do I navigate when my mother feels like she doesn't love me? Like it's so many layers to this.
Yeah.
And then talking to parents and parents being having them recognize like your trauma is showing up and it's impacting your daughter, and it's creating barriers to conversation with you guys, and sometimes you just don't even realize it. They're like, this is just how I relate to my mom, and never really given thought to why that is.
Mhm.
So what would you say has been kind of the major themes that come up with, I guess, problematic relationships between mother and
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm glad that you said problematic relationships because I never want to give off the impression that all mother daughter relationships are, laced with trauma and things like that. And that's where I work and that's where I swim. So that's what I talk about because if they weren't having issues, they wouldn't come see me, right? So that's what I talk about. And the thing about it is bicultural. It doesn't matter. I have Indian clients. I have clients from the dominant population. I have clients from the Caribbean. All over, it seems to be that same theme. And themes that come up are she won't listen. She minimizes my issues, and minimizing meaning like, oh, what do you have to worry about? You don't have any jobs. And when I was your age, da da da, you know how that whole thing goes, right? And then, but the thing is, mom doesn't even realize that in doing that and bringing up that comparison, which is an unfair comparison, what it does is shuts down the relationship and it builds barriers. Uh, the biggest thing that I noticed in my audience that daughters are really looking for is validation from their mothers, right? And so that comes up when
Mhm.
they feel judged or not validated. So those are some of the big stuff.
Yes. Yeah. Yep. That she doesn't listen. She thinks she knows everything, and then and how it manifests as an adult, especially like I'm an adult now, and now she still doesn't listen. And and then
Right.
too, what I find it with mothers is um they take that personally as an attack, right? Like, you're calling me a bad mother. That's what they're hearing. Bad mother, bad mother, bad mother. And it's like, no, that's not what we're saying. Two things can be true at once. Like, how does your child experience you may not be how your intent. Um, those are two different things. And so you may have the best, most positive intentions for your child, but she may not experience that the same way.
Exactly. And that is hard. And when I'm doing the mother daughter, whether it's coaching or doing therapy, I always put significant time into preparing the mother to, to be introspective and to be reflective because the lack of that introspection really can be more damaging in the process of trying to heal that relationship, right? Because then you would say things like, "Oh no, that's not what happened." Well, you experienced it differently
Mhm.
than the person who was going through it. And so being able to be reflective and try to hold that space, that mind body connection, being aware of what's coming up with for you and giving mothers tools to navigate that because when we became mothers, for the majority of mothers that I know, that is like, oh, that's my life's work. I don't want to fail at this. And
Yeah.
so to hear this, it feels like criticism. And
Mhm.
what do we do when we feel criticized? We deflect or we come out defending ourselves. And that can be really hurtful.
Yes. Yes. I
Mhm.
always use like the example of, the working mom, right? Who's always working. She's doing everything that she can to provide for her children, but yet the children feel abandoned because mom's not there.
Yeah.
And both things can be true. Like with my head, I know that you love me, mom. I can see that you're working really hard to provide for us. However, in my heart, I'm not feeling you because you're not here.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect example.
And it's okay. It's
Yeah.
two different things, to recognize that you've made the sacrifice of your
Mm-hmm.
time to be able to provide. However, there
Yeah.
is an indirect consequence to that. unfortunately.
Right. And as a mom, I would hear, "Oh, you're so ungrateful." That's how it
Hmm.
transcribe in my mind, right? "Oh, you're so ungrateful." Okay, how do you think I afford that Game Boy or that Nintendo? Or how do you think I afford them gym shoes that you have? And that's not what we're saying, right? We're
Hmm.
like, we want the heart connection. Yes, you can do that, and
Yep, exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And so I think one of the biggest things that I would say, what are some of your kind of tips in bringing mom and daughter to the table to begin this type of work?
Wow, that is a really good question. And like I said, I prefer to start with individual,
Mm,
working with each person individually. So even helping mom to look at some of her traumas, because as a mom, one of the things that I realize is that some things in my childhood don't even come up until my daughter was going through that stage. And
mm,
it's almost like reliving it, right?
yeah.
And so helping mom to look at her life, look at some of her attachment style, right?
Hmm.
Some of the traumas that she might have had, and to see how that is playing out in a safe environment where she doesn't feel like she has to deflect or defend herself or be combative, and also helping daughter to realize from the perspective of her mom, some of the things that mom might be going through. So I do a lot of brain body education,
Hmm.
psychoeducation, and I prepare both of them to come together. We have ground rules and we talk about, what is the goal of us coming together,
Hmm.
right? It's not an attack.
Yeah.
It's not a you did, yes, some of that will come up, but ultimately, what is the result that we want when we leave the table? And so that's really important to establish, so we know that in this process, though it may be hard, we're coming from a place of love.
Right. Yes, I think that's really important, especially when we're starting to talk about kind of family therapy and getting multiple people in the room, having a common goal and making sure that this is a healing space. We're not attacking each other. We're just trying to get to the bottom, to the root of it. Um,
Right, right. And I think that's really important what you say. We want to get to the root of it, because sometimes the discomfort of bringing these things up might cause mom to say, "Well, why do we have to bring up the past?" Or daughter might be, "Why do we have to bring up the past? Why can't we just go from where we are?" And sometimes we can't just do that. We have to look back. I encourage each person to take responsibility, be accountable,
mm,
for the things, whether you knew it, the things that you didn't know, right? The things that you did and shouldn't have done, the
mm,
things that you didn't know to do.
right.
You can take responsibility for that and validate your daughter's experience so
Mhm.
that we can move on. And I also say to daughter, once we get to that stage, what responsibility are you going to take for your own life now?
Mm, yeah.
And that might mean that you set boundaries. If mom's doing the best that she can, and that came from Dr. Brene Brown's work, which I love her work. If she's doing the best that she can, and this best is being hurtful to you, what boundaries do you need to set? And that's a big deal, because when we hear boundaries, if we don't have that foundational information, we hear walls and
Mm.
barriers.
Yes, exactly. And I think that's one of the things that I do working with young adults is in I think even teenagers in understanding like especially teenagers when they don't necessarily have control over the household, how do you protect yourself from being hurt, from your
Yeah.
mother? Because that's an uncomfortable conversation to have.
Hmm.
Like your parent is supposed to love, supposed to nurture you, but what do you do when that parent isn't necessarily safe, right?
Exactly.
And how do you do that? And even into adulthood, people are like, oh, well, that's your mother, you only get one of those, that extremely minimizing commentary that you get from other people that you try to share with when you try to get some advice on how do I deal with my mother and all of her things, or how do I deal with my daughter and all of her things. And people are like, well, you only get one of those, that's your family, and it becomes really difficult to make boundaries with
Yes.
someone that is your family member, let alone your mother.
Exactly. That's a difficult task. And again, if we have different interpretation of boundaries, and I love again Dr. Brene Brown's definition that says boundaries are just what it's saying and stating what is okay and what's not. Just so
Absolutely.
simple. What is okay and what's not. And I know that it's challenging as teenagers to say what is okay, because especially if you're in a household where your experience is not really valued. You're
Mm-hmm.
still a child. You don't know what you want or what is okay. That becomes very difficult to help them navigate that space. And so, what I do in spaces like that is say, okay, well, then let's back up and look at what is in your control.
Mm-hmm.
What do you have control over? And that is what we'll plan around, and that is what we'll focus on. Focus on what's in your control
Right.
and then
Absolutely.
surrender the rest.
Absolutely. That's a good strategy to have when working with teens who don't necessarily have the control.
Mm-hmm.
And and you can see it carry over into young adulthood and adulthood, because they still have that same kind of barrier mindset. Like they're not able to recognize that I'm an adult now and I can actually put these boundaries up,
Mm-hmm.
and it's okay to limit my exposure to my mother and to limit how I engage with her. I feel like I have that conversation all the time. Like, you're an adult now. Like, you can literally choose how you engage with your mother.
Yeah. And understanding also that in some culture that is like unheard of, right? That is unheard of, and it's sacrilegious to even say something like that. And when we say that, I think it's important to preface it by saying if you're not safe,
Yep.
it's okay to do what you need to do to be safe, emotionally safe. Emotional safety is very important. The mother daughter relationship is such a foundational relationship that it really influences our all of our other relationships. It becomes a blueprint for all the other relationships in our lives. And what sometimes as mothers we don't realize is the things that we're teaching our daughters, and the space that we're holding them in, whether it's you don't get to talk back to me, or you don't get to voice your opinion. We are teaching them how to be in other relationship as an adult.
Absolutely.
And so when I'm working with women, whether it's a young woman or a more mature, older woman, and they're in a domestic abuse situation and they are, questioning how can I even begin to see my way out of this, we go back to the root, which 9 times out of 10, it's founded in the mother daughter relationship.
Mm. Whew, that's heavy.
Yes, as that first caring adult in your life, to whom you form that attachment bond,
Hmm.
that informs the attachment bond that you're able to have in your intimate relationships.
Yep. Yes, absolutely. And also your relationship with self too. I have that conversation with a lot of people, like, your inner voice, like, who does it sound like? Right?
Mm-hmm.
And most of the time they're like, it sounds like my mom. Yeah, absolutely. You
Yeah.
know, the way we talk to our children, being
Yeah.
super critical, like we should really be mindful of that, because that does become that inner voice that they have, setting the tone for the relationship that they have. I do a whole exercise with my clients, like, what does your inner voice sound like? Who does it sound like? Is it your voice? Is it loud? Are they screaming at you? Is it a whisper? Is it, or is
Yeah.
it constant? You know, how does your inner voice sound?
Yeah.
um you
That
know.
is so true. And I work with mothers on, okay, do you want to be an inner critic or inner champion? Inner cheerleader with compassion, or do you want to be that critic that is always critical, always there?
Mm,
Because then what the daughter does is she internalizes it and she starts to criticize herself, and then we have this imposter syndrome, low self-esteem, and
mhm.
all those other things. And again, we're not blaming mothers. We're just saying what happens as a result of the disconnect in this relationship.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. And I think the in going along with that is like not necessarily being super critical of mothers, but knowing how all of this comes into play. You don't know what you don't know,
Yeah.
right? And so sometimes you don't know how you're actually impacting your child without having a conversation with the child. You know, a lot of times I think I've working with children, I find this where it's rare, it's hard for children to express themselves, first of all, but then we're all going through experiences. So if you as a parent are experiencing a crisis, you know, I bet you 100% that your child is too.
Yeah.
And so taking the time to actually ask,
Yeah,
check.
but see, we have to go back to the drawing board where we stop saying things like stay in a child's space.
Yeah.
Be seen and not heard. And I'm so guilty of that. That's one thing that I wish I could redo is some of
Mm-hmm.
my parenting.
Mm-hmm.
So and I've learned to accept the fact that I was a great mom. There were so many good things that I did. And then there were so many fails that I had and big mess ups that I've had. All right. And so reconciling both polar opposite is difficult sometimes. And I wish with the knowledge that I've acquired since then and the experiences, I wish I could change some things.
Mm-hmm.
But I can't. So I'm teaching and hoping to inspire others to,
Mm-hmm.
try,
Yeah,
I've been there.
it's great. Like I know, like that's one of the struggles that I have with my kids, because they are like, we have conversations, we talk a lot, and so but when they go to like their aunts and uncles, because we weren't raised that way, you know, we stay in a child's place. So when they go to their aunts and uncles, sometimes they perceive that as my kids are being disrespectful because they're asking questions, they're pushing
Mm-hmm.
back, you know.
Yeah. So
And
how do you live in that community? It's like bicultural, right? How do you live in that way at home and then have to do something else or don't even know that somebody else might even perceive it as being wrong or rude, right?
so some, you know, so I let, you know, I tell my siblings like, well, no, in our house, you know, they have a voice, we listen to them, you
Hmm.
know, because it's not always what we think it is, you know, and so I give them the opportunity to express themselves.
That's true.
And so
It's yeah, that's so important. I love that.
and it's interesting because like I said, we weren't raised that way, and I think recently we did like a family trip to Tennessee, and so it was, you know, my siblings, and then it was like my aunt, so the older generation and stuff for us. And I had a conversation with my aunt, and she was saying how she said she felt bad having to, like, you know, pop my little, like her great niece, because you know, she had said, you know, she was cursing or something or doing something that she wasn't supposed. She was like, but she was like, it hurt to do it because I have learned so much since growing up that, like, that's not how we do it. You know, I
Yeah.
spoke with her, and we just had this really great conversation about how, you know, it is important to give children a voice and to not always want to be willing to like beat them and have them be quiet and silence them. And so it was really interesting to like full circle see like my aunt,
Wow.
come around, and like we were able to have this kind of discussion, and she was just open to the conversation.
That
Um,
is so powerful. My goodness. That is so powerful. Right?
yes, it was a great conversation, and it shows how, when you know more, when you know better, you do better. Um,
That's right. At least that's the hope.
mhm. And I
Right?
always say too, like when I have major like parenting fails, and when I'm talking to other parents, it's like we're all gonna fall short. We're all excuse me, we're all gonna make mistakes. So one of the things that I always like to say when I'm talking to parents and other like anyone really, I always say like we all make mistakes, we all fall short. However, the healing is in circling back, and admitting that
Yeah.
I made a mistake, that I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. How can I do better? Like it's the circle back that's important.
That is so true because we're not perfect. There's no blueprint on this stuff. It's how you manage that space, right? Is
Mhm.
really how you manage that is really important. One of the things that I encourage mothers to do, after working together is to have that conversation with your daughter to say, "Hey, what kind of parent or what kind of mother do you need me to be?"
Mm.
How, get a scorecard, right?
Mhm.
How am I doing as your mother? And giving them the opportunity to say, well, mom, I love that, you sign me up for all these activities and you're always there to drive me around and things like that. But I don't like that when I tell you about my friends, you think I'm doing the same thing.
Mm.
Just different things like that. So, given that space to be able to have that conversation without being um, penalized for your opinions, I think that's a powerful step towards moving to
Right.
strengthening and building that relationship.
Absolutely. Yeah, with my own mother, I had a very complex relationship. It was very interesting.
Mhm.
But I think the one thing that stands out to me the most about my relationship with my mother is that she's always been open,
Mhm.
um, to to us. We can talk to her about literally anything.
Mm.
um, and I think that is what helped to keep the relationship together, even when, it got kind of crazy and, she did some things that I didn't like, or, I hurt her feelings. It's still the openness to be able to talk to her about it, or talk to her about just anything. Just her being open was always what sustained the relationship in the end.
That's powerful. That is powerful. Yeah. And I think sometimes mothers may feel like if I'm open like that, or if I'm asking questions like you're suggesting, then that means I'm soft and I'm weak and I won't be respected. And it's like, I'm trying to teach that you don't have to be domineering and instill the fear of God in your child for you to be respected.
Yes.
They can fear you with a reverence
Mm,
without fearing the punishment or the repercussions of your punitive actions.
absolutely.
So, punitive actions actually don't bring respect.
Yes. I agree with that. I
Yeah.
agree with that. And two, in the openness with my mother, I would say I've always respected my mother. That was always the thing. And she rarely, if at all, punished me and gave really harsh consequences. That just wasn't a part of how we related to each other.
Yeah. There
Um,
was no need for that.
no, it wasn't. And I think it was a little it was a little abnormal too, because I think like I remember some interactions between me and my mom and then my aunts, and then my aunts being like, "Oh no, she's so disrespectful." And it's just like, no, that's not what was happening here. Um,
Exactly.
but I think I lost my mother in 2020, but I feel like me and all of my siblings, it's the same thing, um, about her being open and honest with us allowed us the space to be open and live our lives. Like, even if it's a hot mess and everything, she accepted all of that. Like, she just and she
Yeah.
would gently guide us. And I think, again, that openness, and it also created, like, that's the atmosphere in our family. So our siblings we're very vulnerable and open with each other. I mean,
Yeah.
could be
And that's so important.
it could
That
be a
is.
little bit too much now that we're little boundaries. but it is interesting how, the softness, and without having that punitive and that fear, what it does for a relationship. I
Yeah.
think, back to that Tennessee trip with my aunts, like, it was so funny. There was a moment where I think, like, my older cousin, and his mom had a, like, interaction, and she was kind of like pouting, like, "I'm the mother." It's like, you are, but we're all like grown.
We have thoughts and ideas and opinions.
So it was funny. But I love the idea of kind of healing that relationship and just going there, because you know a lot of people are like, "Oh, well, if it's not a good relationship, if it doesn't serve you, cut it off." Like, we're in that cut off thing.
Yeah, yeah,
But what I always say is, like, cutting something off doesn't heal the wound. It just creates distance.
yeah. And
Um,
with the mother daughter relationship, yeah, cut it off and then it's going to pop up here,
and pop
pop
up.
up on the job,
Mm-hmm.
pop up with your own children. It's going to pop up.
Yep. And then too, like, I know the heart of most of the people, like, even if mom is completely, like, toxic, there's, like, this innate thing in us where we just want our moms.
We do.
Right. And so we may say, yeah, I'm gonna cut my mom off, but that's not your heart. That's not
No,
what you really want to do.
no, that's your hurt.
Yes. And so it's like, how do we work within this context? Because what if it is the truth that your mom is never going to change? She's stuck in her ways,
Yeah,
but you still have that desire to want to have that relationship with her. So,
yeah.
how do we do that in a safe way? So that you still can honor, respect your mom, and live with her
Hmm.
and have her be a part of your life, but to what extent?
Yeah. And I think that that is a really good question because that's where we have to establish what boundaries we need to establish. And then there are those mothers who have zero bit of nurturing in them.
Mm,
And so you may not get that. And it's okay to have those, create those safe substitute relationships to get that part that she's not able to give you.
absolutely. Um, yes, absolutely. Boundaries are important. And I always say, like, understanding, like, the capacity that your mom has, she
Very
can't be
important.
what she's not.
Very important. Very important. And if that's the best that she's doing, that's the best that she can be, then how do you get, what you need? It doesn't stop your needs from happening, but how do you get that in a healthy way?
Exactly. And I will say, like, in my life, I have lots of different mothers,
Mm-hmm.
for different capacities that stepped in when my mother was absent, or whatever the case may be. And so that's really important to acknowledge that that's a need that you have,
Yeah.
and how do you go about getting it, and building other relationships to fulfill that.
Yeah.
It's okay to say that, my mother may not be the most healthy person for me.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I still
Yeah.
desire that type of relationship.
And there comes a time in our lives where we have to then learn how to mother those inner wounds and those inner voices and that inner child that still needs some of those things that you won't be able to get from her.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah.
And I say the other advice that I get is, what are your mother's strengths? Like, what does she do well? And you engage in those activities with her. If your mom is an organization queen, like have her, spend some time, have her come organize your closet with you.
Yeah.
If your mom likes to, watch Ratchet TV, maybe watch some Ratchet TV with her once a
Yeah.
week, like what are her strengths? What are her interests? And you build memories there,
Yeah.
rather than harping on what she's not doing and what she's not
Yeah.
capable of.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that is so key. Again, it goes back to focusing on what's in your control.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. All right. So I will ask, okay, so this is one question. So what do you tell clients who are struggling with healing um, from a toxic mother? How do you, yeah, what advice do you give for the woman who feels hopeless in repairing that relationship with her mom?
Yeah. And it's not much different from what we just spoke about,
Mhm.
right? It's realizing and recognizing what are her limitations, right? She's not able to, again, be introspective. She's gonna be blaming. She's gonna, blame you for all her mishaps and why she wasn't successful in life, all those different things, whatever it is that brings out that toxicity in her. And realizing that, okay, that's not healthy for me. So if that is who she is and what she's going to do, then what do I need to do? How do I need to take care of myself? How do I need to provide safety, emotional and physical? Because sometimes, toxic moms don't care how old you are, they're coming for you
Yes.
physically, right? Because in their eyes, you never grow up. And that is something that I try to work with mom to understand, recognize the grief that they may never get to process as their daughters grow up.
Mm,
If you don't grieve those key transitional points in her life, then that brings up so much stuff. It's like there's a curve in the road. You got to turn with the curve. But a lot of times when moms, you just keep on this path, and it's like, no, it's time for a curve. So our inability to make those turns at those pivotal points and
mm,
make them successfully really determines how the relationship is going to unfold.
that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Mm.
So being with the
'Cause you see,
discomfort.
yeah, because you see, like at those major moments, this
Yeah.
the teenage girl that, you see it, the tension starts to build.
Yes.
Um,
And then that's when we have a tendency to pull back. Oh, she's smelling herself. She thinks she grown. All those different
but she
colloquialisms that
thinks
we
she's
use.
cute.
Yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
And really she's just it's a period of individuation that's happening. She's learning, and she's pushing the barriers on all those different things, and it's not personal.
Right.
So I encourage moms at that point, lean in more. Don't just back up and get more rigid and, like, I'm going to crack down on all of this and she's not going to see the light of day. And it's
Yeah.
like, then it becomes a power struggle.
Yeah.
And that's nobody's going to win.
No. And then you get tick for tat, you start getting petty.
Exactly. And then next thing you know, you catch a case and defacts is involved.
Mhm.
That's not necessary.
No, you're right. Okay, so the last question that I'll ask is what are the things that comes along with setting boundaries? Is often the guilt that you feel.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you feel guilty that you have to distance yourself from your mother. You feel guilty that, you know, you're hurting her feelings. You feel guilty. How do you how do you how would you advise someone to
Yeah.
deal with that guilt that they feel in creating boundaries?
That is a really good question because yes, and oh, some moms can make they can pile
Mhm.
the guilt on.
Yes, yes.
They can, and you just hear it in their voice, you see it in their faces, and it's just like, oh God. And that's
Mhm.
hard. That's hard, but also realizing that, okay, it's not going to be easy,
Mhm.
but you got to stay the course. Find mental health care, get a good professional to help walk you through that so that you don't resort to doing unhealthy things to soothe that guilt.
Mm.
It's okay to learn how to sit with those discomfort, those feelings of discomfort,
Yes.
and not have to medicate. Because a lot of times that's what we learn. We don't learn to embrace emotions, and so we learn to medicate, whether it's with food, drugs, sex, gambling, all those different things people have traditionally used to medicate.
Mhm.
So getting a very strong mental health professional to help you walk with that, sit in the guilt, journal about the guilt, right? Because when you shed light on that guilt, it's not going to last too long,
Yep.
right? It's just a matter of, okay, somebody to remind you, why are you doing this? How
Mhm.
come we're doing this? What is the desired outcome? Okay, how are you taking care of yourself today?
Mhm.
Because if not, that guilt will eat you alive.
It will, and it'll make you just backtrack.
Backtrack,
And, and I tell
backtrack.
people like it's not going to be easy whenever you start shifting
Mm.
your patterns of interactions with people. They don't like it. There's always going to be a pushback.
Exactly. And, there is something I read somewhere that says boundaries are only uncomfortable for people who benefit from you not having them.
Absolutely.
So you're gonna get the pushback if I'm benefiting from your lack of boundaries. What, you're gonna change the script now?
Mhm.
What?
Who told you to change the rules of engagement? Like, no.
Exactly.
There's always going
Ex-
to be pushback.
Exactly. So stay the course. Have sound counsel, people who can really check you and check you when you're wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Because you have boundaries, it's not you you know you can mess up too. You can be wrong in some of the things. So have those people in your life who will say, "Nah, girl, that was no, that was a little hard. You're trying to have boundaries with your mom, but you really need to have boundaries with yourself."
Mm-hmm.
Right?
True.
So have those people who are qualified to call you out on your stuff as well.
Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
Those are such great tips because I feel like I feel like that's a major barrier to, improving this relationship because that guilt trip, guilt will have you doing some things.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
just to ease that. And like I said, innately we have this desire to want our mothers, even if she's a horrible mother. Like it, and I say that to parents too. Like, do you know your child is always going to want your love and affection, even if you're a completely horrible, wretched parent.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
your kid is still gonna want better for you. So you always have the opportunity to repair that.
Yes. Yes. Until she said, well, you know what? I've been hurt too much. And so we
Mm-hmm.
need to, put up some, barriers. And this is how we're going to engage, right? You know, and then that's a hard place to come back from. However, I've seen people and mothers who have really called for therapy because they want to have a better relationship with their daughters, because the barriers, not barriers, but the boundaries have led them to really look at and examine and, wow, this doesn't feel good, but I don't know what to do.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
I've had that as clients are going through it with me. I've seen that, like, okay, we've put up the boundary and we've kind of almost cut mom off. And now mom is freaking out because, oh, she's serious now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, oh,
Yeah.
well, and they feel the loss of that. And they're like, okay, now what? Now what to do? Right.
Yeah, that's a horrible loss. That is a horrible loss, and we call that ambiguous loss, because you're there, but you just don't have that emotional connection, and that's hard to identify. And that's hard to even admit that, wow, they've they've put this in motion. And so even paying attention to that, and working through that, and again, get some mental health counsel, get somebody to walk with you through this.
Absolutely. Definitely listening to a mental health provider as you're going through this, teaching you about boundaries, what's appropriate boundaries, because sometimes we may know what boundary, we know we need to put a boundary somewhere, but we don't know what that may look like, what the boundary
Yes,
is.
absolutely.
And so, having help is always, always, always a good thing. um,
Absolutely.
okay, so I think that we had a wonderful, wonderful discussion. And so I like to end my podcast with my Arise Beautiful affirmations. So Arise Beautiful for me is kind of like an internal call to self, that you're telling yourself, arise beautiful. And then we finish the sentence with what we need. And so today we're talking, of course, about relationships, the mother daughter relationships. So if you can leave our listeners with an Arise Beautiful affirmation about the mother daughter relationship, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, I love that. And my affirmation would be, arise beautiful, you are enough.
Love it. Arise beautiful, you are enough. Mm,
Yes.
very simple.
Yeah.
We don't hear that enough, I think.
Yeah.
Know that we're enough. We're enough.
Yeah.
And even if we may be in a situation where our parents don't see that we are enough,
You still
know
are.
that we are enough. That's the baseline, that we're enough.
That's right.
All right. So tell the people where they can find you.
Oh, absolutely. You can find me at www.ann, A-N-N, Dillard, Dillard.com. That is my website. And I am on all different social media platforms, Ann Dillard .lmft. You can also visit my store, um, to purchase any of my products. I have the mother daughter prompt journal and also the mother daughter conversation cards to help build stronger relationships with each other. And you can find that on my website.
Yes, those cards, the mother daughter cards, the journal, definitely great tools to begin to facilitate those hard conversations and just begin to nurture that relationship. And so, thank you so much for coming and sharing your knowledge and wisdom with the audience. I love your work. I am definitely glad to see that there is this space available, that there is healing in that
Yeah.
relationship, and we can have strong relationships with our mothers. Um, and so, thank you for doing your work. Thank you for being a guest. And if you like this podcast episode, please like, share, comment, subscribe if you haven't, and stay tuned for our next episode.
Awesome.
Bye.